MeasuringHistory.com presents the Outer Planet History of the 21st Century. And basically what this means that we're going to be covering the quadrature alignments of the three most outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. As you can see in the frequency wave table, the three outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, have a much lower frequency than the Saturn or Jupiter waves, and therefore that's going to bring us the opening square of Uranus-Pluto. That's for the 1966 Uranus-Pluto 2104 wave. Then for the 1993 Uranus-Neptune 2165 wave, we get the opening square of 2040. The opposition, again, going back to the Uranus-Pluto wave 2046, so 2012, 2046 are related. Then 2063, the first opening square, or the opening square for Neptune-Pluto, so the first hard aspect since 1893, around 2063. Then again, another, obviously Uranus-Pluto has the highest frequency among the outer three, so we're going to see Uranus-Pluto more than the other two. So again, in 2072, we get the closing square for the Uranus-Pluto square, so issues going back to 1966. And then finally, the last quadrature alignment among the outer three is the 2081, the opposition for the 1993 Uranus-Neptune 2165. And if you go back to 1822, 1868, 1908, 1956, 1992 with the Uranus-Neptune wave, or any of the five quadrature alignments, 1850, 1875, for instance, 1932, all of them are, in the opinion of this author, major historical turning points. 1890 might not seem like it is, but in retrospect, it is the center of the transition from the empire to the nation, modern political state that we now live through. So, also 1993 was obviously a turning point as far as the internet, as far as the Soviet Union dissolving, the Velvet Revolution, etc. So when we look at 2012, that brings us to T-square that we lived through. You can look at the other video, the Great Recession, Great Depression compared, talks about 2010, but basically the Uranus-Pluto square is active from about 2009 through about 2017. This T-square is between Saturn and Uranus, Saturn-Pluto, and Saturn and Uranus. That one is active just from 2010 into 2011, and so not as active as the one in the 30s, but 2012 definitely lays the foundation for the rest of the century. We look at the Arab revolutions, the fact that we went through a financial crisis and are still going through the after effects of that, are something that astrologers expected with the T-square of 2012, and then there you see it highlighted, the whole period from 1966 to 2012 to show the relationship. Going back to the highlights, now we're going forward. Remember that this is part of the 1893 Neptune-Pluto wave, so it's going to have ramifications for the Neptune-Pluto paradox. And going forward, looking at 2040, we see both of the T-squares there, 2040 and 2045. Saturn opposed Neptune being squared by Uranus, and then that's in about from 1939 to 2043, and then sort of overlapping. In 2043, we get Uranus opposite Pluto being squared by Saturn. So whenever you get a T-square among the three or the four outer planets, you get a major historical change. The last two Uranus-Pluto oppositions brought us Max Planck's quantum theory, Einstein's E equals mc squared, along with the airplane and the first inklings of mass production. And then before that, we had 1792, which was not only the French Revolution, but the beginning of the final push towards the Industrial Revolution. And a Uranus-Neptune square as well. Connected with 1993, we would say the breakup of the Soviet Union, the popularization of the internet, are all something that's going to be connected to things that are going on in the 2040s, especially since we also know that in the 1960s, connected with the Uranus-Pluto conjunction was when the internet was invented. And then, so then going forward, we're looking at 2053, because then we see that there's a trigger 2053 that Saturn is square Neptune just before it is conjunct Pluto, and therefore that works as a trigger effect. So as early as 2053, the 2063 Neptune-Pluto's lower square comes into effect, and then if you just look at the 2050s altogether, you just see a trigger between Jupiter and Saturn, triggering the Neptune-Pluto lower square throughout the 2050s. So well before the actual square happens in 2063, what we would expect from the Neptune-Pluto lower square is going to be coming to effect. And again, it has to be related to Neptune-Pluto. Brings us the Neptune-Pluto paradox. Neptune-Pluto paradox 2140. It deals with progress. I'm sure that the issues, because what's going to happen is that the 40s, the two t-squares in the 40s are going to basically bridge with the lower square of the 2060s. So issues of the paradox are already going to be evident in the 2040s, and just basically going to be even more, the idea behind them will be even more reinforced in the 2060s. So we can expect major change in directions as far as where our societies will be moving forward. Lower squares are always having to deal with moving forward instead of dealing with issues from the past, as the upper square does. And also what we're going to see in the 2060s is that the 2060s is going to differ somewhat. The early 2060s is going to differ from the late 2060s, because primarily the Uranus-Pluto lower square is going to start coming into the picture. And if we look at the chart for 2069, it resembles one in 1567, as it also did back in the 2040s. So again, reinforcing that we have to look at the entire period, I would say from the 2040s all the way through the 2080s. If we look at the quadrature alignments for this Neptune-Pluto wave, 1893, Neptune-Pluto 2384, they're a lot more spread out than they were for the previous Neptune-Pluto wave 1399 and Neptune-Pluto 1892. But the same, basically we're getting the same aspects, the same transits as happened, the Uranus opposite Neptune, Uranus square Pluto, and then the Saturn being mixed in there. We get the same aspects, basically the same transits as happened during the previous Neptune-Pluto wave. They're just spread out over 20 years. And if we look at the experience leading up to World War I, it's a very similar experience at both, well, what I would expect from what is going to happen in the 2060s through the 2080s, the 2040s through the 2060s through the 2080s. I would expect a similar type of episode. I'm not predicting a World War I type episode, but I am predicting that it will look as one episode when historians write about that period in the future. So basically, the 2070s is going to be tied to the 2060s and the Neptune-Pluto lower square, and then fade into where we get a whole complex of Saturn transits. Saturn conjunct Uranus is also going to be opposite Neptune, and it's also going to be squared lower square Pluto, and then we get the Uranus-Neptune opposition 2081, and then that's the last major quadrature alignment throughout the 21st century. So I really think the 2020s, 2030s, for the lack of the fact that there are no quadrature alignments, and then the 2090s, when in fact we get a trine between Neptune and Pluto and a sextile between Uranus and Pluto. I think it's going to be a relatively quiet time in the 2090s. 2104, as we get the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, beginning the next Uranus-Pluto wave, which is 2104 Uranus-Pluto 22-21, so you were already talking 23rd century. But then after that, there's not any quadrature alignments until 2025. So again, the turn of the 10th century, even though it's going to look similar, have the Saturn opposition to Uranus and Pluto as it did in the 60s, it'll have that similarity. I think it'll be coming at a more peaceful time. It'll be, the transitions will have happened in the mid-century, and basically that would be my conclusion about the 21st century, that the most of the action is going to happen between the 2040s and the 2080s, and the 2040s will be related to issues that we see in the 2010s, and also ones combined combined with ones that happened at the beginning of the early 90s. So that's just a mechanical overview. I'm going to give a more editorialized view in later videos and talk about each of the decades separately. I hope you really enjoy that. If you do, please like on Facebook. Please like Measuring History on Facebook. Please join the Measuring History channel. And Waves has a whole new look and a whole new structure, so please enjoy that, Waves, just by going to measuringhistory.com. And thank you for watching. Measuringhistory.com. Thanks you for watching.